Hey there everyone, I'm Jakejames Lugo and welcome to the channel. Now as you guys can tell, I'm back on that Zelda stuff because today we are talking about a classic. Today we are discussing A Link to the Past. Now before you go all crazy in the comment section with your keyboards and stuff, at least take a moment and try to hear me out of what I'm going to say about this game, because there is a lot to discuss about it. So enough dilly-dallying, let's just dive right into this and get started. The Legend of Zelda A Link to the Past was released for the Super Famicom in 1991, but came out a year later for the Super Nintendo in North America and Europe. This is the third entry of the Zelda series, which returns back to the top-down perspective gameplay from the first game, after Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link on the NES tried to mix things up by adopting a side-scrolling gameplay style. Story-wise, this is the gold standard for the Zelda series, with Link taking up arms to save the Kingdom of Hyrule from the evil of Ganon once again. However, this is when we see a lot of things for the first time that future Zelda games would adopt over and over again. The importance of the Master Sword, the conflict between Ganon and the Seven Sages, and so much more. Right from the get-go, things are going down, with an iconic scene where Link's uncle fails to rescue Princess Zelda from the sorcerer Aghanim, kicking off a grand adventure ahead. Things only get crazier from there, leading to what some consider to be one of the best 2D Zelda games ever made. There's so much more that happens once the story brings in the Dark Realm and Hyrule changes form, turning everything on its head. But is A Link to the Past really as good as people have said over the years? I won't lie when I say that there's a very strong case to be made here. Now the story of Link to the Past is very simple, but it feels a little bit more cinematic compared to the previous Zelda games that you had on the NES. This is something that's great. Obviously, this is the Super Nintendo. This is the first and probably the only big Zelda game on the Super Nintendo, at least for the time. So everything was kind of upped up to 11, especially with not only just the design, just the colors of the Super Nintendo made everything look so vibrant. It had that very epic feel that you got during the 16-bit era. But the thing that really gets to me about Link to the Past is that this is the first time we see a lot of interesting little tidbits about the Zelda franchise that at least have become iconic much later on in the years to come. But this is the first time we get to see a lot of that stuff. A lot of the musical cues, a lot of the little details here and there that we associate with the Zelda series and the franchise overall. This is really where they got their start from outside of the original NES games. And that's something that's very cool. You can see a lot of parallels in Ocarina of Time, which was the next big Zelda game that came after this one. There's so many similarities, so many little things that are pulled directly from A Link to the Past. And to me, that's pretty awesome. And yet, like with all great Zelda games, it really comes down to the gameplay besides all the story, the music, and the epic nature of everything else. It's really the gameplay that ties everything together. So let's dive into the gameplay of Link to the Past and actually see, does it really still hold up even today? The core gameplay of the Zelda series is straightforward and has worked very well over the years, with little changes here and there. Top-down action with a big emphasis on exploration, just like Miyamoto intended. A Link to the Past follows this same approach, but presents everything more colorful and fleshed out in 16-bit. You can pretty much go anywhere in Hyrule at any time, provided you've gathered the right tools to get there. At the start, you're pretty much broke and need to follow a set path to gather items and complete specific things. Once you obtain the Master Sword early on and enter the Dark Realm for the first time, the game really opens up like the original Legend of Zelda. My only major problem is how long it takes before you could get access to the fast travel ability, which makes a huge difference towards later parts of the game. You have to complete a side quest that will take you between the Light and Dark Realm to get the necessary items beforehand. The quest is pretty simple and not hard to complete, but I would have rather had it a lot earlier. Fast traveling in the Light Realm just makes it easier going to places you've already visited, while backtracking on foot can be a real time waster while picking up small items here and there. Speaking of side quests, you're probably going to need a guide to complete the majority of things in A Link to the Past. There just isn't a lot of hints in the world while you're trying to obtain certain items or know where to go when you've gone lost. The map you have does point out dungeons once you enter the Dark Realm, but there's no icons that point out every key location on the map in Hyrule. You also can't fast travel within the Dark Realm, which is a major bummer when getting around. You need to fast travel in the Light Realm and use the magic mirror in order to quickly revisit places in the Dark Realm without walking. Outside of these nitpicks, it's still exciting to explore Hyrule in this new Zelda adventure. I enjoy going to new places and discovering new things where I haven't been to before, which turns out to be fun and satisfying. So if the intention by Nintendo was to get that classic formula that we got in the original NES Zelda game and bring it into the new generation of the 16-bit era with the Super Nintendo, this was a fantastic job because it feels great to control Link in A Link to the Past, as well as also it has all these little things that feel familiar but are also brand new and just feel very different. It feels like a natural progression from the original NES Zelda into this one on the 16-bit era. Exploring around Hyrule just feels awesome, it's exciting, there's a whole bunch of little secrets you could find here and there, there's new different exciting places you could go to as the story progresses. It takes that same philosophy and that same idea that Miyamoto had with the original Zelda game and really kind of evolves it, really hones it and perfects it for the Super Nintendo. And any fan of the Zelda series would really love something like this. My one and only other major complaint about this, outside of the stuff that I mentioned beforehand, is that using the magic mirror to go between the light and the dark realm is cool, and it's interesting in relation to what's happening in the story. But later on, when you have to go back to the light realm from the dark realm and vice versa like that, it could get a little bit too inconvenient when you can only use the mirror once, and then you have to find some sort of portal that's hidden around. To me, that was something that was a little bit annoying. I just couldn't understand why you couldn't use the mirror just to go back and forth at will once you have it. It just felt like a big waste of time that once you go one way, now you have to find some other like portal that's like, you know, in some random spot, sometimes not even close to where you're at when you actually use the mirror in order to go back to the original realm that you were in. Some people might feel a little bit differently about that, but at least in my experience, that's how I felt, because every time I use the mirror to go to a specific spot, all of a sudden I realized I had to go get something else, and then I have to travel around to all these different places and at least look up where I could find a portal just to get back to the original realm. But outside of all that, I do want to talk a little bit more about the dungeons and the boss fights in A Link to the Past, because those are the meat of the game. Outside of like all these other side quests and stuff that you do, there's a bunch of other stuff I want to tackle with that, because a lot of people that do discuss A Link to the Past don't really talk about the cons about this game in relation to those. Any Zelda fan will tell you that the dungeons you explore are a huge standout in every game. In Link to the Past, you visit dungeons in both the light and dark realms, with most of the real important ones taking place later on. Overall, these are well designed and have clever 2D puzzles that aren't super difficult, but there are a few points where the game begins to stumble for me. Once you get to the Ice Palace and Misery Mire, that's when things could get difficult and very cheap. One can argue that this happens much earlier, but in my experience, that's when around I began to get annoyed with some of the dungeons. I found that some of their puzzles required you to have certain optional items on hand before entering, which required you to go back into the overworld to obtain. Without them, you wouldn't be able to complete the dungeons, so these items weren't truly optional. Most of the time, you wouldn't have any idea about this until you hit that brick wall and realize you need to exit a dungeon and go around searching Hyrule. With a guide, this is a non-issue, but it can be tedious and a little frustrating without. This can also be said about the boss fights throughout the game. Most bosses can be defeated using common sense and your trusted sword, but a few of them will definitely force you to get optional items or require you to be very well prepared before taking them on. The most annoying boss fight to me is Moldorm in the Tower of Hera. He's not impossible, but annoyingly difficult since you could get knocked off the platform and forced to restart the whole fight, even if you've lost a few hearts in the process. I'm not a fan of this kind of thing, especially when the boss's health fully recovers once you get back in there, while you're still damaged. However, the one boss fight in the entire game that I feel is poorly designed is Cold Stare in the Ice Palace. Unless you have at least 1 or 2 potions to recover magic, you're completely at a loss in this fight if your magic is depleted. The only way it could be damaged is with the Fire Rod or the Bombos Medallion, and if you run out of magic, there's no other way to damage its icy shell. Unlike the other boss fights in the game where you can always default back to your sword, there's little alternatives and no way to recover magic here without potions. And since you're in a dungeon that requires you to use magic frequently just to get around, this can set you up for failure by the time you get to the boss room. Side note, I didn't even find out until much later that the Bombos Medallion could take out his shell within 1 hit when used during the fight, which totally changes things up. But you need to have known that beforehand to bring it with you in order for that to become a significant factor. There's nothing in the game that gives you a hint about this, so unless you had a guide online to help you out, you wouldn't really know about this. Anyway, besides that one spot, the rest of the game wasn't that difficult for me and got more enjoyable as I progressed towards the end. For a Zelda adventure, this is definitely a step up over the first 2 games, and I still feel that it holds up even today. Now I have to say, these dungeons aren't impossible, they're just very challenging and some of them could use a little bit of tweaking here and there. Same with the boss fights like I mentioned. One thing I do like about them is that this is the first game that has different themed dungeons that you would see in a lot of other Zelda games to come years later. Especially with Ocarina of Time, you saw the same thing with Majora's Mask, and many others that happened on other Nintendo consoles. This was the first game that I could think of that really did something like that. And it works out for the better because not only do they look colorful on the Super Nintendo, but it just gives this whole epic feel that you're going to all these crazy places, like different themed areas, while you're trying to fulfill this big quest. It just feels awesome and it works well for the Zelda franchise. Going back to the boss fights now, I do have to say that the final battle with Ganon, once you defeat all the different temples and the other bosses, and you go through that whole boss gauntlet, which, by the way, not a big fan of that. I'm not really a big fan of boss gauntlets towards the finale of a game, but the build up toward the final battle with Ganon, I think was actually really well done. There's so much hype going into that fight from the rest of the entire game, but even leading up to that fight with Aghanim, that that little kind of secondary boss fight, the Sorcerer, I thought that was actually kind of cool leading into the final battle. There is definitely a lot of prep that you're going to have to do right before you get into the battle with Ganon. Not only just getting some of the upgrades with not only Link's health, but also his sword, his shield, and all these other different things. But it's definitely worth it when you get into the battle because it makes certain sections of it significantly easier. But one thing I do notice is that a lot of the stuff going on with the Link to the Past, it's almost one for one that you see in Ocarina of Time. Literally, the final battle with Ganondorf and Ganon in Ocarina of Time is almost the exact same thing of what you get here in A Link to the Past. It's kind of crazy. So after everything I've said, can I recommend that you go back and play The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past? Despite my criticisms that I've said up to this point, hell yes, this game still holds up. It has a lot of exciting aspects about it, especially for fans of the Zelda franchise. There's a colorful world for you to explore, there's a lot of great secrets to discover, there's some exciting battles, and an interesting story with a satisfying conclusion. If you're a Zelda fan and you haven't played A Link to the Past yet, you have homework as of right now. Go back and play this game. You're going to be very satisfied by the time you're done with it. And there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts about The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I've wanted to get to this game for quite some time, especially since I've been playing a lot of the older Zelda games here and there, but also because people talk about this game so much, it feels almost sacrilegious to gaming to at least not play it at least once. And I've dabbled with it over the years, but I never sat down and really completed it for a review like this. It was actually kind of cool and something that was exciting for me and something very interesting because now I have something even more to talk about with you Zelda fans out there. But as always, with any game that I review on this channel, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think about A Link to the Past down below in the comments section. Tell me, are you a fan of this game? Do you think there's other better Zelda games that everybody should be playing? Do you hate A Link to the Past? Which I'm pretty sure a lot of people would say that you're wrong, but talk to me about the Zelda series down below in the comments section. Thanks for watching this video, everyone. Go ahead and click the boxes on the side to see more videos and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to go visit my Patreon page for exclusive gaming content that I know you'll really love. Hope you have a chill day. Peace out and stay epic, everybody.